Aloha, and welcome to the Kukui Connection. I'm Marilyn Lee, and this is a weekly show where we talk about community issues, political issues, and issues of culture and the arts. Recently, there was in the news an announcement that Mililani Mauka has fire ants. Everyone really didn't know what it was all about. And we had a big community forum, and it was attended by about 300 people. But a lot of you in the audience did not attend, and I know you're all very interested in knowing more about it. So I really have a special guest here today. His name is Rob Curtis, and he is an entomologist, and he is with the Plant Pest Control Branch of the Department of Agriculture, and he is the incident commander for fire ants and the Rhinoceros Beetle. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Welcome, Rob.
Thank you.
So nice to have you here. First of all, I always like to allow my guests to tell a little bit about themselves. Talking before the show, we found out that we actually went to school in about the same area at Syracuse University, and you at the School of Forestry at SUNY. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I did go to the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. I majored in entomology, and I ended up working there for a few years after I graduated, and then I moved on to Cornell University, working as an entomologist on invasive species. From there I went to Washington State University, where I continued work on invasive species. And from there I went to the University of British Columbia, where I worked as an entomologist. I came to Hawaii to work as the entomologist in Kona a few years ago, and have recently become the acting Plant Pest Control Branch Manager, where I'm working on many projects of invasive species, but the main two right now are coconut rhinoceros beetle and the little fire ant.
Amazing. Well, entomology is the study of
Insects.
insects, okay. And it seems that we're having problems with all kinds of critters in Hawaii these days.
That's true. We get about 20 new invasive species every year in Hawaii.
20 new invasive species. And are they all unwanted, or are any of them beneficial?
No. Any invasive species that we get in Hawaii is definitely unwanted, but not all of them are bad in terms of their impact. So little fire ant and coconut rhinoceros beetle have large impact, so we consider them particularly bad invasive species, but there's some that have very little impact to us. They're still unwanted, but the impact is not quite as high.
Not quite as high. Well, let's talk a little bit about the little fire ant and where it came from and what the effect of having it here is.
Sure. The little fire ant originally is from South America. It is established in many places throughout the Pacific. It's also established in Florida, and it's been in Florida since the 1930s. We got it first in Hawaii on the Big Island. We discovered it in 1999, and when we found it in 1999 in Puna and Hilo, it was very widespread, which was an indication that it had been there for some time undetected. Also at the time, we had no tools that were available that were effective against it. So the pesticides that we had, mechanical means that we might have had to kill them, were not effective. So on the Big Island, they continued to spread until, well, they're continuing to spread now. But the Hawaii Department of Agriculture established the Hawaii Ant Lab. That's a project of the University of Hawaii.
Is that with CTAR?
That's through RCUH,
okay.
actually. And their mission is to develop tools that can be used to combat the little fire ant. And since their establishment, they have developed tools that are effective, and they've been using those to, since then, eradicate little fire ant when they become established on other islands and then throughout the Big Island. So in Kona, for example, in coffee, there was a coffee farm that became infested, about a 3-acre coffee farm. And in a 14 months' time, we've eradicated the ant as far as we know. We're continuing monitoring to make sure that it is eradicated. We've also got a small population on Kauai that we've been working on. It's restricted right now to a cliff face, and our people there have had to take rappelling courses so they can rappel down the cliff and treat the cliff. And then on Maui, there was an infestation at a farm that has also been eradicated and right now is in the monitoring phase.
So it has a big economic impact then.
It has a very large economic impact, not only to agriculture, but to tourism. On the Big Island, they've had to close beach parks and other places where tourists may go in order to treat those areas. It also, the impacts to agriculture can be great because it will affect the ability of pickers to enter a farm, to get in there and pick fruits and vegetables because they're getting stung. They may not want to enter. And also it'll encourage other pests such as aphids and scales and mealybugs. The other impacts are to human health and animal health. People get stung not only in their yards but in their homes, and animals can get stung, and if they get stung in their eyes, it can cause them to go blind.
That's a really scary thing.
Absolutely.
So in Mililani, talk a little bit about the situation, well, on Oahu and specifically in Mililani, since we're sitting here in Wahiawa and in central Oahu.
Sure. So in December of last year, 2013, we discovered that little fire ant had come from the Big Island on hapu'u logs that were sold at garden shops. And those were found initially on Maui, and we were able to trace those back to a distributor here on the Big Island, and then from here on Oahu, and then to a distributor on the Big Island.
Okay.
And the Oahu distributor gave us the records of who they distributed them to in terms of which garden shops and nurseries. So we followed up on those, and we estimate there were 1,000 to 1,500 hapu'u logs that came last year, and we were able to account for roughly 600 of them and collect those and destroy them. And the others are somewhere out in the public. So we established an incident command response, such as like a FEMA emergency response, to locate all these logs in residences, other nurseries, and bring them in and destroy them. And at the same time, we increased our abilities to inspect plants and areas at nurseries that may be infested. Also, one of the most important components is to get information out to the public so that way people are aware that this insect is new, it's a problem, and that we need their help to deal with it. So through this outreach, we've gotten many samples that have come in from the public, and one of which came in from Mililani Mauka. And that Mililani Mauka one was actually the first residential sample that came in that was positive for little fire ants. When we got the sample and found that it was little fire ants, we sent people out there to respond and to survey that property. When we got out there, we realized that it was much larger than we originally expected, and we needed to have a larger group of people come out. So the rest of our incident command group, which was about 15 to 20 people, went out and surveyed the neighborhood. We found that it was about 18 properties and a portion of a gulch that were infested. The total is about 10.2 acres. And starting today, the Hawaii Ant Lab is meeting with the residents there, specifically about treating their properties. The Hawaii Ant Lab and the Department of Agriculture are working very closely with those residents to treat those properties, to monitor those properties, and hopefully to eradicate the little fire ant from there.
So one important thing that you want to get across is, I think, the fact that to test your own backyard with the stick and some peanut butter, spread very thinly, and then kill the ants by putting them in the refrigerator and in a plastic bag and then reporting it.
That's right. We can't test everyone's yard on Oahu.
Right.
There's too many yards and not enough of us. So we are asking people to test their yards, and the instructions can be found on the Hawaii Department of Agriculture website. There's a print version, and there's also a video version.
Now you brought a little booklet. Is this
Right. So this is a flyer that we've generated as part of this incident command response.
Okay.
In here is also the instructions on how to survey,
Okay.
and who to report it to. There's phone numbers on the back.
Great. Okay.
And this is intended to be something that can be used statewide. It's a little bit more specific to Oahu than any other statewide flyer, but we have the numbers of the rest of the islands where they could contact. So people can survey their own yards very easily and mail them into the Department of Agriculture at 1428 South King Street in Honolulu, and then we will respond to that. We'll let people know whether they have little fire ants or not. It's not necessarily a one-time thing. If people get new plants or if they receive goods from the Big Island, it's always a good idea to check those and see if they have little fire ants.
Now, that's easy to say, but you brought a specimen of little fire ants, and they're really teeny tiny.
They're very small. Most people have a hard time seeing them.
That makes it even more difficult to control.
That's right. They're called little fire ants because they're so small. They're about the size of a period on a piece of paper.
Whoa.
And they pack a very, very hefty bite, or sting rather. And the testing is easy to do, but you can't see for yourself. You would have to send it in to us, to the Department of Agriculture, to confirm. You can drop the chopsticks and put them in a bag, freeze them, write your name and your address on them, and mail them to us. And we will let you know if they are little fire ants. People without a microscope and without the experience would not be able to tell.
So if you do the test and you don't see anything, send the specimen in anyhow?
You could do that, yes. Even if you don't see anything, you could send the specimen in. Because they're so small, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, they're like the head of a pin.
That's
so
right.
they're really, really tiny. I didn't realize they were that small. The other thing that I learned at the forum in Mililani was that these ants don't actually make nests on the ground.
That's right. They are one of the few ants, and one of the only ones we have here in Hawaii, that will nest up in the tree. And that's actually unusual compared to some other places. In Australia, for example, where they have this ant established, in Australia they call it the electric ant. It gets cold in the area that they have the ant established, and it doesn't actually nest up in the trees, it just nests on the ground. But here in Hawaii, where we don't get cold weather, they're perfectly happy to nest up in the trees like they do in their native range in South America.
Oh, so they've adapted to our climate.
Well, they actually are acting here more like they do in South America in their native range.
I
In
see.
Australia, they're acting a little differently.
I see. They adapt to the climate of,
Right,
of Australia. Yeah.
And with them nesting in the trees and spending most of their time in the trees, it creates problems for people that have large trees in their yard, or beach parks, for example, because the ant will rain down on people and sting them as it's falling on them. In addition to that, if people just treat the ground in their yard with pesticides, granular baits, they'll miss the infestation. The ants will remain up in the tree, perfectly safe, unaffected, and as soon as people stop treating their yards, they'll just come right back and take over again. They form what's called a three-dimensional super colony, which means that they're up and down the entire tree, back and forth across an area. They're everywhere. And there'll be many, many colonies that are all interconnected. You can't tell where one begins and another one ends.
So in other words, if you have fire ants in your yard, you should work closely with your department and with the ant people and with invasive species people, because you might really cause more spreading of the ant by doing insecticide treatment just in a small space. Is that right?
That's right. We're asking that if we do confirm little fire ants are in someone's yard, that they work with us to eradicate it. We are the experts in dealing with this ant. And even though pest control companies and pest products that you can buy over the counter at garden shops may say that they can deal with fire ants, we are the most equipped to deal with fire ants. So we ask that people follow our lead and our instructions.
Well, that's important information to get out to the public, I think, because at the forum there were people asking, well, what is it that is used to kill these ants? And if everyone runs out and gets a bottle of that stuff and starts using it, then it may not really be something that's going to prevent them from staying at all.
Yeah. So at this point on Oahu, because the infestations that we know of in Waimanalo and Mililani are distinct and contained, we're asking that people follow our lead and our instructions. On the Big Island, where the ants are widespread and they're in natural areas, they're in abandoned areas, they're in residential areas, people can treat their own property there.
Okay.
because they're able to take care of their own property and at least stop them from coming onto their property.
I see.
It's a different situation there on the Big Island than it is here. So the instructions that we have that are available online at the Hawaii Ant Lab website at littlefireants.com, they apply more to the Big Island people that are dealing with it as a much more widespread issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Well, I think those are important instructions to get across to people, and hopefully people will notify you, notify the Hawaii Ant Lab, and work with you to eliminate these pests before it becomes a more serious problem in Mililani. Well, we've talked a lot about ants, and I know that you'd like to talk a little bit about the coconut rhinoceros beetle. And one of the things that you told me before we started was that with the little fire ant, we can't get any federal money to combat them because they are already present in Florida and parts of the United States. But with the coconut rhinoceros beetle, we can get federal monies. So talk about the coconut rhinoceros beetle. That's a mouthful.
Sure, it is. So because coconut rhinoceros beetle has not been found in the United States before it came to Hawaii, it is considered a federally actionable pest, which means that when it does, or in this case when it did show up here in the U.S., here in Hawaii, we were able to get assistance from the USDA, and assistance in the form of personnel and money. The USDA has recently hired over 30 seasonal workers to help with trapping and surveying. They're putting traps over all of Oahu at a density of 4 traps per square mile. They're doing visual surveys of trees to see if there's damage to the trees, and they're looking for mulch piles that may be infested and used as breeding sites. So the immature stage of the insect uses mulch piles as their food. They feed on decaying plant material, and the adult beetle feeds on developing palm fronds. So the damage to trees is actually something you can see visibly. It's a V-shaped cut in the palm frond. It's very obvious. There's really large differences between little fire ant and coconut rhinoceros beetle in terms of their effects. So the coconut rhinoceros beetle, in terms of landscape changing effects, you can see those effects very easily. You can see dying coconut trees, damaged coconut trees.
And you can see the beetle too, because it's real big.
And you can see the beetle because they're about an inch and a half long.
Yeah, we're going to be showing those on the screen.
Right,
So.
good. So and also the little fire ant, because it's so small, you can't see the insect necessarily, and it doesn't make any real changes to the landscape. So the two insects are very different in terms of those effects. The coconut rhinoceros beetle could affect a palm industry that we have here in Hawaii. They could affect date palms, which in California is a large industry. So USDA has interest in keeping the coconut rhinoceros beetle out of the mainland U.S. and also eradicating it from Hawaii.
And where did you say that came from?
We're not sure exactly where the coconut rhinoceros beetle came from, how it got to Hawaii. It is from South Asia, and it is established in many countries that we get daily flights from, such as the Philippines, Japan, Guam, and other areas in Southeast Asia. And it probably came here on air cargo, and right now it's established on Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam, and that's probably because its proximity to the airport. The beetle probably came off of air cargo, and the base was the nicest place around that had food for them.
Lovely place to live.
That's right.
You know, I lived in the Philippines and I never saw one, but it was quite a while ago that I did. But these things, I mean, you can't miss one if you see it.
Yeah, they're very large. They are surprisingly cryptic, though, because they fly around at night. During the day, they're either up in the tree or underground under a mulch pile. And a mulch pile could be as simple as some grass clippings in a pile in the back of somebody's yard.
So best not to have piles of stuff, mulch, or palm fronds, or any kind of debris like that in your yard.
Yes, if people can avoid it, that would be ideal. A pile of grass clippings in the back of somebody's yard would be enough to sustain a few larvae. They really like coconut material, which is why they're called the coconut rhinoceros beetle, but they will feed on pretty much anything that's decaying.
And these
plant
are the
material. These are the larvae.
these are the larvae. I
They're
don't know if we can see it right now in the we'll take some pictures later, but quite large. You know, I guess the beetle itself could be mistaken for a big roach. You know.
It's possible when they're flying that they could be. There's another beetle here right now that's called the oriental flower beetle that I think every report that we've gotten in from the public has turned out to be the oriental flower beetle. It has a very similar life cycle. The larva also feeds on decaying plant material in mulch piles, and the adult is also pretty big. The only difference is the adult beetle has these gold or white spots on the wings. So when they're at rest, you can see that it's got spots, whereas the coconut rhinoceros beetle doesn't.
Well, the important thing then for people, if they find a bug that they don't recognize, is to report it, save it, put it in a jar. Doesn't matter whether it's alive or dead, or
yeah, the best thing for people to do with anything that's unusual to them here in Hawaii is to report it to the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture deals not only with insects but also invasive plants. So if there's a new weed that has shown up on a roadside, for example, we would be the ones that would respond to that. We have a phone number that's called the Pest hotline. It's 643-PEST, and you can call that 24 hours a day and report that there's been a sighting of a snake or a lizard or an insect or a new plant, and they will either call you back if you leave a message or get back in touch with you some other way if you leave your email.
hey, 643-PEST, we're going to show that on the screen as well.
Great. It's been redone recently. Until just recently we didn't have voicemail for that, so it's working a lot better now than it has in the past. I actually have called that to report things after hours when I need to talk to plant quarantine to report a pest. I've called 643-PEST, and the next morning they call me first thing in the morning.
Well, that's interesting. Well, you know, I think what you've just told us about the fire ant and the coconut rhinoceros beetle should really help people to understand why it's so important to have good preventive measures, good reporting, and enough people to deal with this pest problem. And right now that's not completely true.
We could always use more people to deal with invasive species problems. We do our best with the people that we have. We have very good people that work for the Department of Agriculture. If we had more, we could do more. We always need the support of the public. We always need the support of the legislature and the governor. But we do have very good people that do very good work.
Including you.
Hopefully me.
Thank you so much for appearing on the Kukui Connection. I really appreciate your being here, and I know you're very busy, but I think that hopefully a lot of people will watch this show and they'll know more about what to do if they find a beetle, and they will test their backyards for little fire ants.
I hope they do, and thank you for having me, and I'll come on any other time.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to the Kukui Connection. We've been listening and watching Rob Curtis from the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. We've learned a lot more about the little fire ant and the coconut rhinoceros beetle. It's a hard one to say. Tune in on Thursday evenings and Saturday afternoons for the Kukui Connection. Aloha, and thanks for tuning in. Before I get to the